My name is Isabella. I'm 34 years old. And just last month, my world fell apart in a way I never could have imagined. I lost my husband, my partner in everything, my best friend, the love of my life. Anthony died of a heart attack while driving home from work. One moment, we were on the phone laughing about dinner. He was teasing me as usual about how my oven fries never came out crispy enough. And the next moment there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a police officer standing there, hat in hand, his face carrying the weight of terrible news. He gently told me they'd found Anthony's car pulled off to the side of the road. The engine was still running. But Anthony was already gone. We had been married for 10 years. And those 10 years weren't just time. They were a life we built from the ground up. He wasn't just my husband. He was the steady in my storm, the calm voice when I spiraled, the hand that never let go. Even during the hard parts, he stepped into the role of being a dad to Luna, my daughter from a previous relationship when she was still in diapers. He never hesitated, never looked back, and from the moment she first called him dad, it was like everything in his world finally made sense. To her, he was everything. Sunday mornings meant pancakes in the shapes of cats, dinosaurs, and bunny rabbits. Bedtime came with wild voices, made-up stories, and giggles that echoed down the hallway. Every first day of school, he'd sneak a little note into her backpack. Encouragement scribbled in goofy handwriting, reminders that she was brave, smart, and loved. She kept every single one. So when I called my parents that night, shaking, barely able to breathe, trying to process the unthinkable, I wasn't even sure what I needed from them. Maybe just someone to sit with me while I tried to comfort Luna, who was crying herself to sleep down the hall. Maybe just someone to be there. Anything. Something. My mom picked up. I could hear the noise in the background. Laughter, loud music, the clink of silverware against plates, the unmistakable hum of a party in full swing. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice light, breezy. "I'm so sorry, but we're right in the middle of Danielle's birthday dinner. Everyone's here." I swallowed hard, then said the words I could barely get out. Anthony died. Silence. I heard her whisper something to my dad. When she came back on the line, her tone didn't change at all. "That's terrible, honey. But we really can't leave right now. We'll call tomorrow." Okay. They didn't call. Not that day. Not the next. They didn't come to the funeral. They didn't send flowers. They didn't even send a message. Not for me. Not for Luna. My daughter stood by the window in her little black dress, clutching a crayon drawing of her and Anthony in happier times. She kept asking if they were coming. She waited there for hours. A full week passed. Then, without warning, they showed up. No heads up, no text, just a knock at the door like it was a casual visit on a regular afternoon. Luna spotted them first. "Grandma and Grandpa," she shouted, already halfway to the door. I moved faster. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me before they could come in. Grief does strange things to your body. It makes your limbs heavy, your voice disappear, your chest feel like it's caving in. I was still in that space. Barely functioning, barely breathing. They hugged me, stiff and awkward, like they didn't know where to put their hands, like I was a neighbor whose dog had died, not their daughter whose husband had just been buried. Then came the real reason for their visit. My mom cleared her throat, her eyes avoiding mine. "We were hoping to talk about the estate," she said carefully, like someone rehearsing lines. "You know, Anthony was always so generous with us, and with everything he did for the family over the years. Well, we just thought it might be fair to revisit that." I blinked. Revisit what? The life insurance. The house. We were thinking since Anthony helped us financially before, maybe 50% could come our way, she said, her voice dropping into a whisper. Danielle's been going through a hard time with the fertility treatments and everything. That's when I realized they were serious. They wanted half of the inheritance, half of what Anthony had left for his daughter. half of the life he built, the future he planned for us. Because years ago, he'd helped them out of a financial hole quietly, generously, without ever asking for anything in return. I couldn't speak. I didn't scream or cry or slam the door. I was too far gone for that. Instead, I turned and walked back inside. A few minutes later, Luna tiptoed downstairs. Her eyes were wide and searching. Are they leaving? They will be soon, I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded, walked over to her little desk in the corner of the living room, and pulled out an envelope from a drawer. She wrote something on the front, then opened it and slid something inside. Can I give this to them? She asked. I nodded, not knowing what was in it. She went outside, her little feet padding across the porch. She handed the envelope to my parents and said in the clearest, most innocent voice, "My daddy's gone now, but maybe this will help." I watched through the window as my dad opened it. Inside was a crayon drawing, her and Anthony holding hands inside a big red heart and a single dollar bill. She had written, "You can't take him from us. This is all I can share." I never asked her where those words came from. Maybe she heard them in a movie. Or maybe they just lived inside her tiny wounded heart. My dad's expression changed. His brows furrowed. My mom's hand trembled as she held the drawing. They didn't say a word. They got in their car and drove off without looking back. For a moment, I thought that was the end of it, but a few days later, a certified letter arrived in the mail. Request for financial reconciliation based on informal agreements. I stared at the words for a long time before taking the letter to Mr. Carroll, the estate attorney Anthony and I had worked with after we adopted Luna. He was the one who helped us rewrite our wills, who had met Anthony and understood the kind of man he was. He skimmed the letter, then looked at me over his glasses. "They're claiming Anthony promised them financial support going forward," he said. "But there's no legal documentation, no contract, nothing in writing, just their word." He assured me we would respond properly, that I had nothing to worry about. But it wasn't just the legal claim that cut so deep. It was the implication behind it. The idea that they believed they were somehow entitled to what Anthony left for us. That they thought his quiet generosity was some kind of lifelong contract. And maybe in their minds it was. Years ago, Anthony paid off $12,000 of their debt. No fanfare, no lectures. He never brought it up again. But apparently they remembered. And they twisted that memory into something ugly. A claim, a demand, a threat wrapped in legal language. But what they didn't realize was that grief had made me strong in ways I never expected. And that strength, it was rooted in a little girl with big brown eyes, a crayon drawing, and a heart big enough to remind two grown adults what love actually looks like. The weeks that followed felt endless. Each day bled into the next. A haze of legal back and forths, cold, impersonal emails, and the kind of stress that settles deep into your bones. There were moments when I stared at the ceiling at 3 a.m. wondering how it had come to this. How mourning the love of my life had somehow turned into defending his memory in court. Then the messages started. My mother sent an email that barely disguised her contempt. She accused me of manipulating Luna. Said I was poisoning her against her own grandparents. My father's message came days later. His words were sharper, less subtle. It ended with a line that stayed with me for days. "We raised you. Now you turn your back when your sister needs help to become a mother." I didn't reply. Not to either of them. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I turned all my focus to Luna. I poured everything into protecting her peace, making sure she felt safe, heard, and loved in a world that no longer made sense. One night, while we were curled up on the couch, her voice broke the silence. "If they win," she asked quietly, "will I lose Daddy's books?" I felt a sharp ache in my chest, the kind that comes from a pain you can't fix. I wrapped my arms around her and held her close. "No, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "No one's taking anything from you. Not his books, not his love, not the memories, none of it." That night, after I tucked her into bed, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote her a letter. It wasn't something she'd read now. Not yet. But someday when she's older, I want her to understand. I wrote about what happened, about how choosing peace over blood isn't weakness, it's strength. I told her how sometimes love isn't about standing your ground. Sometimes love means walking away from the people who can't love you back the way you deserve, and that's okay. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm I had no choice but to face. I sat in that courtroom with Mr. Carroll by my side, waiting for them to show up. They didn't. Their attorney was there reading statements on their behalf like it was just business. I barely heard half of it. I watched the judge instead. How his eyes moved, the way he skimmed the paperwork with thinly veiled frustration. 20 minutes later, it was over. Petition denied, he said simply. Assets remain with the surviving spouse and child. No enforceable agreement found. Just like that, it was done. I walked out of that courtroom into the crisp afternoon air, expecting to feel relief. But what I felt was emptiness. Victory didn't bring closure. It didn't bring Anthony back. It didn't undo the betrayal. Still, I thought that was the end of it. Until a few weeks later, there was a knock at the front door. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I considered not answering, but Luna peeked out the window and called, "Aunt Danny." My heart sank. I opened the door slowly, unsure of what I'd find on the other side. Danielle stood there, but she wasn't the version of herself I remembered. Loud, confident, the center of attention. This Danielle looked smaller somehow. Her eyes were red and puffy, her shoulders drawn in. She looked like someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. She held out a small box. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," she said softly. "But please let me say this." I nodded once, silent. She opened the box. Inside were old photographs, some I hadn't seen in years. Letters Anthony had written when we first started dating. And tucked underneath it all, a folded piece of paper, a silly love poem Anthony had written to my mom back in college, back when they still liked him. Before everything got so tangled. Danielle looked up at me, her voice trembling. "I didn't know they actually filed the claim," she said. "They told me they were thinking about it, but I didn't think they'd go through with it. I just wanted a baby. I didn't want this." She hesitated, then looked me in the eyes. "I'm sorry for everything." Her apology didn't erase the damage. It didn't fix what was broken between us, but it was something. A thread of sincerity in a world that had offered me so little of it lately. And sometimes something is all we get. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, like the video and subscribe to our channel. This is Revenge Scales, where justice always finds its way. See you next time. *.